Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Safeguarding and Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It is the 16th of October, and it's 10 a.m. If we could all just spare a minute for the loss of the two children in Stafford this last week. Be lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Mrs. Adula, she mentioned that she, and I'm sure the rest of the committee will support her in this, would like to understand better if there were any things that Staffordshire County Council could have done to have helped avoid that. Clearly, at this point, we are not able to ask for any information on that because there are police investigations and other investigations ongoing, but I will make a note, and once the appropriate reviews have taken place, then we will look to ask for information to understand better what happened and whether there was anything that Staffordshire County Council could put in place in future to make sure such things don't happen again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Right, so we'll begin with apologies from Charlotte Kelly and Rachel Dingle. Do we have any further apologies at all? No? Okay, moving on. Do we have any declarations of interest? Moving on to minutes then of the meeting held on the 11th of September 2025. Can I take these as a true and accurate representation? Yes. Thank you. So today we are here to discuss the Send an Alternative Provision Improvement Plan. If I could ask Councillor Janet Higgins to make her presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. This document provides an update for members outlining the progress and priorities of the Area Send an Alternative Provision Improvement Plan, as requested by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It summarises the context, recent inspection outcomes, and the collaborative work of Staffordshire Send partnerships, including the local authority, health partners, education providers and parents and carers, to deliver lasting improvements in special educational needs and disabilities provision. The report explains the development of the 2025 to 26 improvement plan, identifies key themes and projects, and describes how progress is monitored and risks managed. In addition, the document clarifies the Statutory Education, Health and Care Needs Assessment (HCNA) process, emphasising the commitment to provide every Staffordshire child and young person with the opportunity to achieve their potential. I would ask that members note the content of this report and continue to provide their support for the delivery of the improvement plan. Okay, thank you.
Ask a question. I'll begin then. So, my first question is regarding early years intervention. I think that perhaps the reason that we have so many EHCPs at the moment is because of the lack of early years intervention. So what are the, what do you propose going forward to address that?
Thank you. I think the basic premise of your question is probably accurate in some regards. I don't think intervention, particularly within the early years, is the only factor for the significant number of education, health and care plans. There are multiple factors why we have so many EHCPs in Staffordshire. I don't think we're particularly discrepant when compared with other LAs across the country, particularly LAs that are similar to us. However, in terms of early intervention, I would completely agree with the premise of your question. There's an awful lot of work going on in the early years space. Our early years team, if I'm permitted to speak on their behalf, have increased their capacity to respond and ensure that children with the highest level of need in the early years are identified and early intervention is in place to mitigate those challenges they experience. From January, we're going to be launching a pre-statutory intervention for the early years, and that's something that we've been doing at school age since for nearly 2 years now with the Enhanced Assess Plan Do Review intervention, where we've had over 1,000 children accessing that particular intervention. So those methods, those early intervention methods, are now going to be in place for the early years children. But I just cycle back to my first comment. There are lots of reasons why early intervention or increasing early intervention will have an impact on those numbers, but I wouldn't underestimate the impact of COVID, the impact of challenges that we're experiencing from a societal perspective, from an economic perspective, and just general changes in attitudes and experiences for children and young people and families in Staffordshire. And if you layer that onto some of the effects of cuts that we've seen in education and social care more broadly, then that's a pretty toxic cocktail in terms of putting barriers in front of children's development.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that, and thank you for your report, Janet. My question really is, yes, early intervention is such a big factor, and I know that from experience, but my question is, how do we monitor these private nurseries and that? Because we've got an awful lot of young children going from 1-year-old to 3-year-old in private nurseries, and how can we make sure that these children are getting the right start in life as we move forward?
Good morning, everybody. So, as a county council, we have a statutory responsibility to oversee the quality of provision within what we would call the private, voluntary and independent sector. So those are all of those kinds of nurseries, but it's not just necessarily nursery provision. So it could be childminders as well. So we include all of that in that kind of that quality of provision, and we have a team that work across all of those providers to understand their quality. Clearly there's a reference to the regulator as well. So again, in terms of the response to Ofsted inspections, so again they are subject to Ofsted inspections. As well as then meeting the requirements that we also set out. So we have a team who work across all of those providers, and it's somewhere in the region of 1,000 providers. So we kind of, get that kind of provision if you include all of the childminders working across Staffordshire.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to the Cabinet Member for the report, and to yourself, Helen and Tim. I'm not overly familiar with SEND. It's not been an area that's been in my view for a long time, so I'm kind of quite new to this. And I have to say, reading the report and all of the acronyms in it, and trying to work out what was what. There was an AP, there was an APP, there's an EHCP, there's an EHCNA, and all sorts of things. So it took me quite a while to get to my head around it. The questions I wanted to ask were, there's one project out of the 12 that has yet to be commenced, and I don't know if I've found in the document why that is. And the other question was about the weeks that intervene before an EHCP is actually determined. I think there's a 4-week gap between determining one and informing is it informing the parents or informing the healthcare professional of it? What's the reason for that? Is it a 4-week gap? Have I got that right?
If I take the second part of your question first, on receipt of a request for an assessment from a school, a professional or a parent, the LA's got 6 weeks to determine whether they're going to assess. And consistently now, we've been responding to parents within that 6-week period, whether we're going to assess or not, over sort of 92, 93% of the time. And if you think about the number of requests that we get, it should be 100%, and we're aspiring to that 100%. But I think, sort of mid-90s consistently is a good starting point for us to start working out why we're not responding in all cases. And I guess it's for the LA within that 6 weeks to determine whether the threshold for an assessment's been met. And I set out that threshold in one of the appendices of this report. So delays in that regard would be the LA trying to find the evidence that may not have been submitted at the point of the request in order to make a clear determination whether the assessment should proceed or not. Can I ask you to reiterate the second part of the question? Thank you.
Yeah, there is still that gap, I understand, between, I'm just trying to find my notes from a few weeks ago when I've actually read the report, that even when you've determined the decision, there's still 4 weeks to take it up to 20 weeks. So, but the other part of my question was about the one project out of the 12 that hadn't been commenced as yet.
Okay, so if I deal with the one project in the Send an AP improvement plan, if my recollection is correct, that relates to the work that we're doing to improve the local offer. And what we're looking for is leadership in that space, a capacity in that space to grab hold of that project. It's an incredibly important project. It's the first point of contact for families, for young people in some aspects, and for schools to understand what the local offer of the authority is. We do have a local offer. It needs a lot of work, which is why it's on our Send an AP improvement plan. And I'm pleased to say yesterday we were very pleased to hear that we've actually found that capacity. And that's no mean feat in the current context with recruitment freezes and the challenges that we're experiencing, but we've managed to reorientate ourselves and find a very strong officer who's going to be taking the reins of that project and lead a team to improve the local offer. And what I would say is that those improvements will include consultation with the voice of families and children to make sure that the local offer that they'll be accessing online will be something that they've been party to in the design.
Thank you. I'd just quickly like to ask, schools often say that before they can actually apply for an EHCP, they have to prove that £6,000 has been spent on that child. I'd just like to know why that is and why are so many turned down?
Okay, thank you for the question. There is nothing in the law or in our processes in practice that holds schools to a legal imperative to demonstrate the use of 6,000. The legal test is, as I set out in the document, that the child or young person may have an SEND, and the second part of the test is may require additional provision above and beyond that which might ordinarily be made by the school. As part of our assessment, we look at what the school's done. So I think what you're referring to is that graduated approach that we would expect all of our settings to have made prior to making a request, but that doesn't preclude them from making the request. The law as it stands, and we're expecting the white paper shortly, and that legal test may change or the proposal maybe for changes there, we don't know yet. But as it stands, and as it stood since 2014, there are two parts to that legal test. So it's interesting that you've heard that schools are saying that we are asking for them to prove that they've spent their £6,000. My understanding is that that £6,000 notional SEM budget has been £6,000 since 2009. So we're now in 2025. I would suggest that what £6,000 got you in terms of provision in 2009 is very different to what a highly effective school can actually manage to squeeze out of 6K. What we're asking for as part of the request is evidence of a graduated approach, and that sits within the Code of Practice and the SEND regulations. But the test for a yes or no to assess is that two-part test. In terms of the number of assessments that we decline, that has increased significantly in the last 4 years. We're around 62-63% of requests being agreed. That's a substantial increase. And for me, that demonstrates the increase in need that we're seeing in Staffordshire. But it also indicates a much clearer position from our schools when they're making their requests, that they've demonstrated through assessment, through teaching, that this child may have and may require additional provision. So it's a combination of factors leading to an increase in our requests being agreed.
Councillor Wallens?
Thank you, Chair. The report on page 14 saying 3 projects are behind and one hasn't started. Can you give us more detail on why these projects have been delayed and what's been done to put them back on track?
Thank you. So it's a wide-ranging improvement plan in a context of getting the day job done as well. So the delays are as a result of capacity as it stands, because we're seeing an increased demand. What we have got, if you refer to the report, page 57, you can see there that we have put in place a review process that's incredibly coherent, so we've got a good grip on the project status of every project status. In fact, we met yesterday afternoon as part of our October work to make sure that we were updating projects in the presence of our DFE advisor. Our DFE advisor has assured us that the steps that we are taking demonstrate good oversight. Where we've got delays in projects, we're escalating any risks through the governance arrangements. And if I refer back to the earlier question around the project that was in the red, had not started, the reason that has now started is because we escalated from that particular cycle up through the governance arrangements, and a solution was found. Now, that's something that's new in this cycle of work, and it was something that our DFE advisor and NHS England advisor were very pleased about. So we've been working very closely to make sure that where we are stuck, because projects inevitably do get stuck, but the test of your professionalism is how you unstick these projects. And what we've seen here is that with very clear governance arrangements, where we are stuck and we need people to wade in and pull a few strings, have a conversation here and there, that's actually works. And we've now got good leadership in the status of that project that was red. And I've no doubt that it will catch up. We've got very clear indicators of where we want these projects to be. So the incoming leadership for that particular project will be accelerating that progress and making sure that we're rapidly moving into a position where we're on target.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the answer. Another one I'd like to ask is, also in the report, it outlines the 20-week legal timeline for EHCP decisions. How many Staffordshire children are currently waiting beyond that limit of 20 weeks?
Significantly fewer than were in July. So we still currently have around 480 children beyond 20 weeks waiting for a final EHCP. And that is regrettable. We're doing what we can to address that challenge. We've had recent capacity to blitz a backlog of assessments, and 300 of those assessments were taken in-house, actually into the central SEND team, because as you're aware, we're in 8 districts. Those 300 that were waiting the longest have been taken into a specific team to target those assessments and make sure that they're completed by December 2025. Current reports from that team indicate that they are on track to complete those 300.
One more question I'd like to ask, Chair, is out of the 8 districts and boroughs, which ones are outstanding or the most concerning out of them all?
I think I would say that I was equally pleased and concerned about all of our districts. These guys are working in an incredibly difficult, legally fraught and complex high-demand environment. They are doing their best. It's a tough job. They're trying to work with our families, our children and our schools. It's not being aided by the current context, and I think since 2014 we all knew that there was going to be a challenge. If you increase the demand without increasing the capacity to meet that demand, you're on a hiding to nothing. The aspirations of the 2014 Act were really good. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but you have to resource an aspiration. What I would say is that we are working with our district teams, and there are fluctuations in challenges depending on how the wind's blowing. But what I would say is in Staffordshire, having worked in 3 or 4 LAs over the last 26 years, we've got incredibly good strategic and political support to address those challenges. So where we present a solution, it is almost always supported.
Councillor Fantini.
Going back to, excuse me, the answer that you gave to Councillor Wallins, have we identified the exact reasons why those children have been in for so long waiting?
We have. As I referred to earlier, we've got a very good grip of the magnitude of the challenge that we have. The key challenge that we have is the national shortage of educational psychologists. And as part of the assessment process, we are duty-bound to provide an EdPsych, as they're called, EdPsych assessment for every child that goes through an EHCNA, the assessment process. So the government, in its wisdom, have closed EdPsych courses. They haven't really increased the size of the EdPsych population, despite the increase in need. Many of the EdPsychs in the country, not in Staffordshire I would add, many of the EdPsychs in the country, particularly across the West Midlands, are moving into private practice. We don't have that challenge at the moment in Staffordshire. Our EdPsychs are working hard, they are well led, and they are happy in their work, if that's the correct term. It's challenging work, but we simply do not have enough educational psychologists in Staffordshire, across the West Midlands, or nationally, given the demands placed on services as a result of the Children and Families Act. That's the primary reason. The other reason, and it would be disingenuous of me not to pick on this, is that the sheer size of the demand means that the capacity within the SEND teams to process the assessments coming through is compromised. So it's a combination of demand on the SEND teams, but also demand upon the EdPsych service. And you can also add in there the demands on our NHS colleagues and social care colleagues who are also legally bound to provide advice as part of this assessment process. And I think I don't have to remind members or alert members to the challenges in the NHS at the moment or the challenges in our hard-working social care colleagues.
Councillor Edgiller.
Picking up on, thank you, Chairman. Picking up on your point there about the lack of educational psychologists, and this has been a problem now, in my knowledge, since the late 1980s, early 90s, and we don't seem to be moving forward on it. And I know it's not an easy subject to put right, but is there anything at all that we can do to encourage people to go into this sort of work, or anything, It's quite worrying when I think 30 odd years ago, longer than that, we were still saying the same thing. We're short of educational psychologists.
I don't think I helped the profession when I moved out of the profession into this role in 2022, so they lost another EP who could be writing reports. You're absolutely right, it's an ongoing and enduring issue that's decades in the making. For me, educational psychologists are best placed in the early intervention space. So I'm hopeful that the white paper, again, I am very hopeful about what's coming forward, will reframe the role of educational psychologists so that they are placed more in the early intervention space. And I guess I wait with bated breath to see where they place the demands on educational psychologists in any new statutory assessment space.
Steve Bell.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the report, much appreciated. I think we have to be honest as well in this room that just because a child is granted an EHCP doesn't resolve the issues, the complexities of the case. And we can get wrapped up in the numbers of EHCPs being granted, not granted within 20 weeks. What matters is the quality of education or healthcare provision for that child. Now, I see too often schools that are struggling to understand how to deal with the complexities of children with severe SEND. And I just wonder, as a local authority, what is actually being done to support schools in that settings, because the resources are going into them. You know, I see classrooms with 3 children in it and 3 adults in some cases, but what the quality of that provision is not what it needs to be. So I'd appreciate an answer on that one first, please.
I guess I'd start off by saying that the 20-week assessment deadline is something that we hold very, very seriously. It's a legal requirement, so we never take our eye off the ball when it comes to our duties under the law. But with regard to the support that we're putting into schools, we are incredibly well placed in Staffordshire. We have a very, very coherent offer across the 8 districts through our send and inclusion model, a hub model that's predominantly run by our settings, supported by the local authority, where early intervention conversations can take place, schools can seek support in a way that's probably unusual across the rest of the country. We also have, for the last 2 years, the local authority financially and professionally supporting schools through enhanced assess, plan, do, review. So picking up children where schools have done their best to meet the child's needs and the family's needs, and then the local authority coming alongside them with resource and technical support to enhance that level of intervention. And as of September this year, we now have 8 teams of schools in every one of our districts, commissioned by the local authority, with their professional development supported by our practitioners working alongside us. And we've had around 101 referrals to those teams, the so-called CDIS teams, the Enhanced District Inclusion Support teams, supporting school to school and providing inclusion support at the earliest intervention point. And I had the privilege of going to the East Staff's CDIS conference that was held in late September. And that was just an incredible demonstration of school-to-school support beyond and above and beyond the commission that we've provided them. So these teams are growing. They are incredibly entrepreneurial, which is very exciting to watch. And they are developing their capacity to support schools in their district. So I think we're doing a pretty good job, given the envelope of resource that we have in Staffordshire, despite the challenges that we have around funding from a national perspective. So we have a coherent offer to our schools.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Stephen Bell.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that answer. And my question didn't imply that the 20-week legal requirement wasn't important. It is. The question was about what provision the children are actually receiving. And I welcome the answer that you've given about the CEDARS hubs. What I think would be useful for this committee is to see some quantitative and qualitative evidence of the impact of those, because, you know, it's all well and good you being here, and appreciate your time saying that it's working very well. But I'd like to see some evidence of that from the schools themselves, so that we can see some hard facts there, that these children in our schools, and that's what it's all about, we must never forget that, are getting the support that they need, because I don't always see that.
If I may respond, is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
So I'd be delighted to provide you with the quantitative and qualitative analysis of the impact of CDIS. We have a designated commissioner who runs our CDIS work, and she's been dutifully collecting outcome evidence of interactions with CDIS teams. Yeah, absolutely happy to make that available to colleagues.
Is it okay if I just pop in and just add some additional to that?
Certainly,
so as part of the governance arrangements in terms of the work that takes place across the partnership, we've got two boards or groups. So we've got Ascend and Inclusion Partnership Group that has representation across the partnership, including education providers, schools and settings. And as part of that governance route, the impact and the implications of the work that takes place either through EAPDR or through the CDIS work is reported there on a, I think it's a bi-monthly basis that goes. So every 2 months there's a report on the impact of that work, and then similarly there's a report then that goes through to what we call our SEND Executive Board, which has the senior executive partnership again from across all of our partners, including schools, as well as then our parent and carers, again seeking that information about the impact of the work that's taking place.
Thank you. On the back of Stephen's question, I'd just like to ask, will that work include the criteria that children have to meet to actually get into a SEND school? I've worked in a SEND school, and the criteria that they have to meet to actually get a place is, you know, it's not, I don't think is conducive to the child. So I'm just wondering if there's any scope to reassess those criteria.
Can I seek some clarification about the nature of the question? So are you suggesting there's criteria to get into a special school?
There was in the school that I worked that the child would have to meet a set criteria to actually qualify for a place. Okay. Yeah. So
my understanding, and based on sort of 26 years of being in this space, the criteria for entry into a special school is based on the outcome of the assessment and the subsequent education, health and care plan. So what we do, and it's our duty under law to do this, and the regulations are very clear, that where we believe as an LA that the child may have their needs best met in a special school, we will consult with the nearest appropriate special school, and it's for that special school to come back to us and say, yes, we can meet need. There aren't any, as far as I'm aware, set criteria in our Staffordshire schools that say you need to be ticking X, Y and Z boxes. It's a case of us going to our special schools, and it will always be nearest appropriate, and saying, here is the plan for the child that we're thinking about. Can you meet needs based on what's set out in terms of the provision of this plan? And I guess the only other thing I'd add to that is that where a parent is requesting a special provision, we are duty bound to consult the nearest appropriate school, even if we believe that the assessment is indicating that that child's needs can be met in mainstream. We will still approach the nearest appropriate special school because we have a duty to act on the parental preference.
Thank you. Councillor Wallens.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, it was mentioned about expanding special school places in local communities. How many of these new places have been created, and when will they be delivered?
So, if my recollection's correct, and I would need to go and double check, the existing projects have delivered around 220 special school places in this last academic year. There are 6 or 7 projects currently underway to further develop existing capacity in our special provisions. But we are also looking to scope out a new special school, and that's in early stages at the moment. And I guess I sort of frame the conversation with, it's important that we work both ends of the spectrum, so we need to be enhancing what happens in our mainstream provision and ensuring that children's needs can be met where appropriate in mainstream, but there is a clear acknowledgement with the increase in demand and severity of SEND, that we do need to be looking at the increase in capacity in our special provision as well. So this is an ongoing activity. So the delivery of those places that I mentioned earlier is the progression there is a further 6 to 7 projects working alongside our special schools. I'd also add that we are, a more recent project is looking at the development of county-wide enhanced resource bases in mainstream, and that's something that Staffordshire is very keen to pursue. We know that other local authorities, particularly authorities like Warwickshire, are further ahead of the game in that respect. So what we'll be looking to do is to enhance mainstream schools who are keen to do so, to make provision for children with EHCPs in mainstream, but at that more enhanced level. And the aspiration is by January to have the specification for those resource bases drafted, and then to follow the processes to go out to expressions of interest. And I'm fairly confident, because I know already we've had around 24 schools contact me directly without me going to expressions of interest to indicate that they'd be keen to have a look at such a model. And that will enhance the provision we're able to offer, because it won't just be mainstream or special, it'll be mainstream, resource base in mainstream, and special provision.
Thank you for that. Another question is to follow up on that. Are these new places being delivered via like academy sponsors or non-academy sponsors, etc.?
So the requirements for the places are irrespective of school status, and so that we operate across all of the kind of the education provider estate. So it's both academies and maintained schools. The reality is, and just because of the fact that we've got more special academies than we do have maintained schools, so we've got 23 special schools, of which 19 of them are academies. So if you then said, okay, so what's the proportion of development in academies compared to our maintained sector, then just because of the breakup now, between the balance between academies and maintained schools is such that it would look as though we were doing more development in the academy sector. That is not a consideration when we look at where we're seeking to expand the provision. The question that is sought is, where do we need it and what is required? Then we'll go and have a conversation with the providers in those areas, irrespective of status.
There you go. Thank you for that. There's one more thing I'd like to add. I know that there was talks of privatisation through other county councils and so forth. Are we in a financial good place? I know it might be a shot in the dark to ask that question, but are we financially sound or, yeah?
So, and I think it's been reported in lots and lots of different forums, we're not in a financially good position. So the way in which the funding is provided for education is through the what's called the Dedicated Schools Grant. And within the Dedicated Schools Grant, we would call it, and sorry, I am going to use the acronym now of DSG, but it is the Dedicated Schools Grant, so I'll refer to it as the DSG. But within the that grant, there is what's called the High Needs Block, which is specifically the funding used to fund all of the youngsters who have additional educational needs and disabilities or require alternative provision. And currently, that budget, or the overall deficit for the dedicated schools block, is in deficit by £53 million, and all of that deficit is as a direct consequence of the overspending of the high needs block annually. So last year, we overspent by £28 million in the high needs block. This year, our forecast is that we will be overspending in the high needs block of somewhere around £43 million. So we're expecting our the DSG deficit, the Dedicated Schools Grant deficit, by the end of this year to be somewhere in the region of over £90 million. So financially, we're in a very precarious position. However, when we compare ourselves to other local authority areas, our position and I'm talking about £90 million, is very precarious. Other local authorities are in far worse precarious situations than Staffordshire is. But by no means are we in a good position.
Thank you. You are right. You know, we are one of the lowest yeah, we are one of the lowest funded authorities for high needs provision, and I know that Councillor Higgins and Councillor Hunt are lobbying for extra funding. If come the next budget in November, if we don't get that funding, how are we placed to, you know, what is our future going to look like?
Okay for me to, yeah. So the reality is at the moment that the central government have in place what's called a statutory override. So it's an accountancy, I'm not quite sure what the technical term is, but I'm going to use probably an untechnical term, fudge, which basically means that you do not have to have that deficit sitting on the balances of a local authority. Staffordshire financially is in a, I was going to say, in a relatively positive position in the sense of, at this point in time, that deficit isn't a fudge, that money has been spent. And so what is being used is reserves that the county council has is being used to offset that deficit, which means that that funding can't be invested. But by the time we get to somewhere in the region of 250 million pounds, that basically means the county council can no longer set a balanced budget because it doesn't have enough reserve to offset the deficit. And that's where the challenges will arise for Staffordshire. Other local authorities are there now, and as I understand it, they're having to borrow money to pay off the interest on the deficits that they have.
Reverend Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chair. Could I add the voices of affirmation to the work that you and your team are doing, which is a very important and often neglected, or has been in the past, neglected area of concern and interest. I'd like to go back to the assessment process, if I may, recognising that really that it's the quality of the support that the children receive that's important. But I'm just asking the question, what is it that causes the delay for some children and not for others? Is it just a matter of luck, or is it because their cases are more complex that causes a delay, or is it a bit of a lottery? I mean, what I'm saying is some children receive their EHCP within the time limit and others don't. Is there a clear difference as to why some do and some don't?
Thank you. It's an incredibly insightful question, and I think it speaks to the complexities of the process. And for me, the children that we're talking about are not cases. These are individual personalised assessments, and they are nuanced and they are individual. So the complexity of the assessment varies child to child. But if you layer on top of that capacity challenges, in terms of completing the assessment process, capacity challenges in terms of writing up the plan, challenges with the co-production of that plan between the LA and the family, and sometimes all's good and everyone's on the same page. Sometimes there are discrepancies in thinking and they need to be thought about and sort of bottomed out and solutions found and negotiations had. And then I guess we have the challenges in capacities with our mainstream schools who may feel that they can't meet the need of the child, and then there are further negotiations and solutions to be found there. Or there may simply be a lack of capacity in the special provision in that particular district for that particular child. So it's a multitude of complex issues in a process that is an unhelpful process. So the statutory process, in my estimation, is not a slick or helpful process. It's overly complex, It sets an adversarial position between parties in that process where it should be setting a collegiate and solution-focused process, and it clearly doesn't do that. And that was very aware early on into 2014, into 2015, where the aspirations of the Children and Families Act was very good, but the processes by which we conducted the assessment were not lending themselves to those aspirations. So I don't think it's one single factor that leads to the discrepancy. And we analyse those patterns to work out whether is it because of X or Y, or is it this district or that district, which was an earlier question. It really is dependent on the individual needs of the child and the challenges that the assessment process inherently throws up for that individual child and family.
Councillor Luca.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to this report. I've got a three-part question. First part is, you stated that we're behind with the assessments for 480, but we've actually brought an in-house team to deal with 300. So what we're doing with the other 180, when they're planning actually finishing their assessment? Moving forward on that one, you stated that you're looking at another 220 places. Can you confirm that that does not actually mean, because we've actually made these extra 220 places in Staffordshire, that means 200 Staffordshire children will actually get them places, right? And also I'm worried about is, because of the already cross-border that we're getting, how many of our children are we now actually sending out to other areas?
So at the point at which we picked up the 300 children in July, they were children who had been beyond the 20 weeks in the most serious of cases. So they were parcelled off and to be targeted to make sure that we complete their assessments in as best time as we can. Since July, we've had assessments going over the 20 weeks because of the challenges with capacity that I've outlined earlier in this session. So the aspiration would be that once we've resolved the 300 children and young people that we'd focused on, that we would, if the capacity remains in that team, would pick up a further tranche of children and further target the completion of their assessments. And I guess what I would say is that at this point in that particular targeted intervention, we're really pleased with the outcomes. That additional team is going gangbusters. They are working very, very closely with families, so they're having those conversations with families as part of the assessment process. So not only are they clearing those late assessments, they're also practicing in a way that we would like all of our teams to practice in terms of in a collaborative way. In terms of the early developments for special provision, I guess we could argue the same for any of our special schools in Staffordshire. We are able to consult schools in Staffordshire, in Derbyshire, in Shropshire, depending on the needs of the child and the location of that child. And I guess where you have county boundaries, sometimes a school that's the closest and nearest appropriate is in Derbyshire or in another local authority. So there is no way that we can refrain from consulting with schools outside of our boundaries, and nor would I want that to be the case, because it wouldn't be in the children's interests. In the same way that other local authorities may consult Staffordshire schools. And I'm particularly mindful of some of our special schools in the east that for some children are closer to families on the other side of the border, because they're literally right on the border. And if you think about particularly schools like Whitwick that are in our South Staffs region, it's only just South Staffordshire, isn't it? So there's a very, very positive agreement between local authorities in this region. It's incredibly positive. We have good relationships with our schools across and within, and with my opposite numbers as well. And we talk to each other, and we make sure that where we're planning increases, that we're mindful of the demand across borders as well. I guess that's the best answer I can give you, that we will always consult and place in the best interests of children and young people as we see it.
Councillor Edgar, Do you still have your question?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. I mean, you've picked up about some of these children with special educational needs being in mainstream, and my question, I've asked this question many times actually, do we have a quiet room in every school where a child comes to school and they're displaying some sort of anxiety or what have you, and they need just a special place where they can go and sit? Following on for, do we have a quiet room in every school? Do we also have somebody in that school that can pick up, that are I don't mean they've got to be professionals, but be able to be qualified to pick up when a child has got problems and be able to take them on one side and talk to them, and you know, so it's the quiet rooms and that I'm really concerned about, because it's something we talked about years ago, but I just wondered whether it's been put into action. Thank you.
I guess it would be difficult for me to give you a definitive every single school has a quiet room. I guess what we're looking at here is a breakout space for a child that may be dysregulating or needing a bit of a break. And I guess we could all connect with that in our own lives as well. Sometimes you just need a bit of space. And the ability to do that is quite a complex psychological function, isn't it? To acknowledge that you're about to lose it and that you need to sort of pull away and just sort of have some space in order to calm yourself. And I guess for me, every child needs to learn those skills. And for some children, it's more challenging to learn those because of perhaps an experience that they've had that's been particularly traumatic, that's either delayed or impaired their ability to do that. The sort of provision that you're talking about, I guess in 2025, I would deem as a reasonable adjustment. And I think that many of our schools, and having visited a lot of our schools in Staffordshire and across the West Midlands, many of those schools will have that sort of provision. Some of our schools will find that challenging to provide given the capacity demands in their settings. But what I would say is it would strike me as very, very unusual for a school not to acknowledge that they need to create spaces where children can be supported to regulate, and it's called co-regulation, where you have an adult who is regulated to sit alongside you to sort of help you to manage your emotions. What I would say is that the primary responsibility would rest with the special needs coordinator, and that's a statutory requirement in all of our schools. And most of our schools will have a SENCO, as they're called, sorry to use the acronym, a special needs coordinator who will have a team to a larger or smaller degree of professionals who work with them. And I would say that they are professionals in all instances, because it's a very complex job to support with that work. So it is, I would say, a part of their graduated approach in most of our schools.
The question, I am actually getting out and about now, I am, to have a look at schools to see what's going on. And I've been to 3 schools over the last couple of weeks, and they've all got quiet space. They've all realised how important it is. So, you know, that is happening, and it's good to see. And you could see that the young people appreciated having that quiet space. So it is happening, whether it's everywhere, but I've been to 3 and they have got that. So I think they are looking at all of them trying to find somewhere for a quiet room.
Thank you for that, Cabinet Member. Can I ask then, if you've been to schools within Staffordshire, do you ever visit schools outside Staffordshire where we place people? And I'm talking about some of the schools that, you know, some of our children that's got real complex needs and that are put many miles away from home. Do you ever visit those, or will you be visiting those? Thank you.
I hadn't actually thought about that, but I might have a go at doing that. At the moment, the work is quite taking up my time, if you like, here in Staffordshire. But, you know, it could be that eventually I can get out there, but I'd have to get somebody to take me, because I'm not the best with my directions. But, you know, that is something that I could look at, and it is a good point. But at the moment, I want to try and check Staffordshire schools are okay. And I am encouraging county councillors and councillors to get out to their schools in their areas to feed back to me, because I think it's important that I know what's going on in the schools. And then, you know, if councillors go and visit, you know, they can report back to me.
Steve Bell.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on the high needs deficit, 28 million last year, 43 million this year. What's the key reason behind that? What's the driver behind the increase in the deficit, please?
Again, multifaceted, so it's not, there is not one driver. So it's the increase in the number of youngsters with education, health and care plans, and so therefore the increased requirement to provide what's called element 3, which is the top-up bit that's funded from the high needs block. There's also an increase in complexity, and so not only are we seeing that increase, but in terms of the needs of those youngsters are greater, and so therefore again require greater resource. There is a third and growing particular challenge, which is around the anxiety and some mental health of youngsters. So it's not necessarily just youngsters with an education, health and care plan. So it's youngsters that have additional needs that are not being and can't be met within the school system. So those youngsters tend to be educated other than at school. So we would use another acronym, which is EOTAS, but that means educated other than at school. And similarly, an increase in the challenges around youngsters who are permanently excluded. And then I suppose that the fifth one is that provision and the availability of that provision. And we do have a challenge in terms of the youngsters being educated within the independent sector. So if we kind of think on average, a youngster within the state-funded sector, and I'm talking about an average here, would be somewhere around the £25,000, £26,000. Currently, the average that we've got in the independent sector is somewhere around the £65,000. However, those youngsters that we are currently finding places for in the independent sector, their average is somewhere around £70,000. So that is a significant challenge in terms of the high needs block. What I do need to emphasise, if all of those youngsters who we are educating in the independent sector were educated within the maintained sector, we would still have a significant overspend in terms of the budget, but that just drives it further.
Building on that, Tim, in terms of the forecast, the trajectory, quite clearly the deficit is going to increase and increase. So is there I mean, obviously I've seen your areas for improvement. Is there a specific plan, a smart, KPI-driven plan, in terms of how do we, coming back on the full circle really, how do we intervene even before nursery age to support these families and the young people to try and prevent the eventual inevitability at the moment?
In terms of we've got what's called the Dedicated Schools Grant, and it used to have a deficit management plan. So it used to be the DSG, DMP, sorry for the acronym, but actually the D for deficit has been dropped. So it's now the Dedicated Schools Grant Management Plan, simply because there is a recognition that there is no way, given the current kind of national context, we can ever get our actions now to actually bring the high needs block back into balance, or to set it within an in-year balance. So that's the first point to make. And even with the things that we're trying to do, we recognise that actually it probably reduces that deficit by about £100 million over the 5 years, rather than the £350 million that to some extent. So yes, we've got some clear KPIs around what we're trying to do to improve. The reality is, though, it is not going to close that gap.
Councillor Wallens.
Thank you, Chair. I do apologise for using acronyms in this question. But how is the co-production with CAHMS services when it comes to children who have SCMH needs?
I was just asking Tim what the acronym was, so I'm just as confounded as you. Could you give me a bit more detail in terms of when you say how is.
How does it work? Like, how does it affect the special educational kids and so forth?
So is your question specifically around co-production? Yeah. So by co-production, we mean working together and working with. So we've been on a significant co-production journey, to use an interesting term, since our previous inspection outcomes. And I guess one of the things I would say is, as that demand has increased since 2014, what we lost sight of, which was clearly picked up in the inspection, was the working with families rather than just producing high quality plans. So since 2022 in particular, we've been working to make sure that we are working with our families, so that we are ironing out differences, identifying shared areas of agreement in those plans. And as of this term, if I'm using the way that I sort of construe my year is by terms, I'm still an educationalist, so we're in the autumn term at the moment. But towards the end of the autumn term, we're reintroducing that sense of working with the child, the family and the school in the planning meetings within the assessment process. And I think what we've seen is, through COVID, when everything went virtual, that connection with our families and other professionals and each other was lost significantly. And I think we're only now beginning to come back into a space where we're face-to-face, and I guess you guys were doing these sorts of things in a virtual sense during lockdown. And we are now coming back into that space where we're doing things that we should have been doing face-to-face, now face-to-face. So we've got a huge co-production agenda and scheme of work ahead of us that was produced with families and with professionals. We've got a co-production promise in Staffordshire which sets out how we will behave with each other and how we will work with each other. That was signed off across the partnership. It had the involvement of children, young people and families and professionals as part of that. And we're now in that embedding phase, because it's all very well to have a promise, but you have to walk the talk. And we're now in a position where we've got really, really strong plans to make sure that co-production is embedded into what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. And from a SEM perspective, the reintroduction of those meetings that I alluded to earlier is the outward sign of that. And we are monitoring whether those meetings are happening, and we're also going to be evaluating the impact of those meetings to make sure that families, even where we might disagree with the outcome of an assessment, have felt like they've been listened to and heard. Because that's the essence of co-production.
Thank you for the answer. I'll make sure this is my last question. I know I've asked plenty of questions during this item. I'd like to ask if business rates, have they influenced the increase in the cost of provision of children for Staffordshire?
I struggle to answer that question. My honest response is I don't think they have. But given the challenges, particularly so from a state-funded perspective, those business rates are funded through the funding that is received, and so that's funded by central government. I suspect the independent sector, they will be paying their business rates. Does that mean that they're increasing their costs? Probably. Does it justify some of the costs? Probably not. So, I don't know.
Councillor Luca.
Just to refer one quickly to Councillor Wallet. As you heard me on the full council meeting on Thursday, we actually have invited all of councillors to come along to a co-production that we're doing to actually help with real-life experience users of care leavers and SEND. And as I said, when we get the final dates, we'll pass that over to you so you can attend that and you can get a better insight of how co-production and coming to working with service users to get a better delivery of service is quite important. So I do appreciate you asked that question. But the question I would like to ask our team there for answering, is, if I remember right, when we had a chat, the costs for transport at the moment is somewhere in the region of 27 million. It's costing her to move or send children around. With this extra burden that's going to be put upon her, what is actually the expected increase on that 27 million for transport?
So again, in terms of probably not one in terms of the plan today, you're right. Yeah, we spend somewhere in the region of £27 million annually transporting or providing travel assistance. Let me get that language right, travel assistance, because we don't transport all of the youngsters. We may provide a bus pass for some youngsters, we may provide a mileage allowance, personal travel budget, and then we do provide the transport for some. Again, this comes back to there is legislation set out by which the local authority has to provide that travel assistance. So that's quite clear. There is what's called, you cannot have a black and white policy, particularly for youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities, because you have to look at each youngster's needs by exception if they don't meet the criteria. The criteria is for all youngsters, whether they live within beyond 2 miles for a primary age child or 3 miles for a secondary age child, beyond that distance to what is deemed to be their nearest appropriate school. Now, for most youngsters from a SEND need, and the most youngsters we're transporting around the county, is because they live beyond that distance. The reality in terms of as that population increases, then obviously there'll be more youngsters who become eligible for travel assistance. We're doing everything we can to look at which is the nearest, closest appropriate, as Hallett's alluded to, in terms of the development of resource bases and additional school places. We look at what that means, but the reality is that there will be around just about 30% of our youngsters who are in our specialist provision receive some kind of travel assistance. That, as the numbers increase, we expect that 30% to be somewhere similar, so it's clear that those numbers will increase. So yeah, the reality of over the next 5 years, that again from a kind of budgeting perspective, the budget will be tight. It does increase with inflation because again one of the challenges with the provision and providing it, and we saw spikes a couple of years ago due to the international market in terms of fuel and the challenges around fuel. That meant that the operators were seeing in significant increased costs, which were passed on to the local authority. What I can say is that we do everything we can to manage it within the budget that's provided, and that budget is expected to increase by those inflationary costs over the coming years, but it will be a challenge.
Okay, and my second question about spend is children that decide to actually go down the route of homeschooling that need SEND, what support do we have in place to support them children?
So there is a statutory right for parents of youngsters to electively home educate. There is a responsibility from the local authority to ensure that the provision is age appropriate, it's appropriate to their ability, and it's appropriate to their needs. So we have what we call our electively home educated team, who have annually undertake that kind of review of the youngsters' provision. There's a nuance to that, in the sense that if you're new into the system, and what do I mean by that? That that there will be youngsters who are living in Staffordshire that we're not aware of, because there is no statutory requirement currently for the parent to inform the local authority that they're living in Staffordshire and they're electively home educating them. As part of the change to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, part of the changes are that we will have to maintain a register of all children who live in Staffordshire, and anybody that's educating a child in Staffordshire will need to make sure that we know that those where those children are. There's a slight change to where a youngster has an education, health and care plan, and they wish to electively home educate them, then the local authority has to provide that permission for that to take place. Only where there's a plan. So if the youngster's got additional needs but doesn't have a plan, then it still sits with the parents. Where the local authority is satisfied that the provision is appropriate, and I need to be clear here that we have some fantastic philosophical home educating families that do a great job. And I know previously, you know, a previous committee like this met with some of those families and met with some of their children, who I understand it was a delight. So from that perspective, we have to be clear here that, but there are a group of children that we do become concerned about in terms of what's the quality of the provision, what's the quality of the safeguarding, and where we are concerned about it, there are statutory things that we can take, which include issuing the parents with what's called a school attendance order, and so they have to then take their youngsters back to school. But there are systems and processes in place for that. What I will say is that in Staffordshire it is a challenge at the moment in terms of the number of youngsters who are electively home educated. Again, just as we see the pressures within our SEND teams, we are also seeing that pressure within our electively home education team, and getting out to see all of those children is a challenge, and it's a risk that we're currently we've highlighted, and we're currently looking at how do we provide additional resource to meet that increasing cohort of youngsters.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I think you've had enough questions. I think this is a really wicked issue that you're trying to deal with, and it's not something that you're going to be able to resolve without significant assistance from central government. I know that there have been anecdotal examples in the local news over the last sort of 12 months or so of families who felt that the decision that was determined by this council was unsatisfactory. I think that'll always be the case. You're never going to please all of the people all of the time. But I am confident that your teams are doing exactly what you can do, given the resources that are at your disposal. So I just wanted to, from my point of view, just offer a thank you, really, because it's a difficult job and you don't get much thanks. So, but we will continue to scrutinise you, of course. but thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Higgins.
Can I just say thank you very much, Councillor Wilson, because I've got a little note here to how proud I am of my team of officers. They are doing amazing. And I'd just like to say that we will keep the pressure on central government to, you know, hopefully make the changes we need. But I would just like to say to county councillors and councillors, can I urge you all just to, from what Councillor Wilson's just said, the officers and their teams are working in extremely difficult circumstances and challenging times, and they're doing their very best to ensure that Staffordshire children and young people are getting the education and the SEND support they need. And I think we need to try and relay that back to our residents. When the residents come to you and say you have problems, they are having problems, maybe try and explain to them the issues that that the officers are working under. You know, they are limited to what they can do. There obviously are things that we can change in-house, little things that we can do, but the massive big things that are affecting this broken system are out of our control. So if I can just say, just be supportive when you're talking to your residents, listening here, but also, you know, remember the challenges that we've got here. And well done, officers. Thank you.
Councillor Luca.
Yeah, can I just actually add to that, that when I actually went over and spoke to the SEND team and social services, can I just say how highly impressed I actually was with their dedication to the job, and the workload that they're under is absolutely astonishing. And I completely agree with what you're saying. The team is working non-stop, and they are actually doing an amazing job to make sure that we deliver the correct support for education to our children. So on my behalf, and I think a lot of the other councillors that are here, we would like to thank you for the team, for the officers and the team that work under you for the amazing work that you actually are doing. Thank you.
Councillor Wallens.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, you're right to call out on central government and so forth to continue, obviously, for fighting for funding and so forth. Hopefully the MPs will be in contact with you instead of just hiding away with the photo opportunities, I suppose, on their Facebook pages.
Do we have any further questions? Oh, sorry, Janet, Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, just to answer Councillor Williams' question, I have got meetings booked, one-to-one meetings with MPs. Most MPs have taken me up on another invite to try and encourage them to support myself and the council and the cabinet, you know, with lobbying the government on different issues to improve the system. So I have got a series of meetings with MPs. So fingers crossed, they will, you know, instead of just having meetings, they will actually put things into action.
Any further questions? No? I'd just like to thank Councillor Higgins and Councillor Hunt for the work that they are doing, and to our officers. To Matthew, the whole send, it's not a political issue. It's a you know, it's a moral issue. And yeah, and thank you to the officers for answering our questions with candour and clarity. Yes, thank you very much for coming along today. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 5 on the agenda, the work programme.
Thank you, Chair. So we've had quite a bit of movement, as you might have noticed from the agenda this morning. So to run through, since we last met, the domestic abuse strategy that was due to be our second item today has been put back at the Cabinet members' request because they wanted some more time to work one or two things through. So we've done a bit of wriggling round. That is now on the 4th of December agenda. The community safety strategy, which was due to come on the 4th of December, we've moved to the January meeting. And then the age-restricted sales to children and young people will put back again. So that's how we've managed to accommodate that. The 4th of December was an extra meeting that we put in, and it does start at 2, and we have 2 now very significant items. So that will be a busy one, I think. Then between this meeting and our meeting in November, you have got quite a busy time. So we've got the Elective Home Education Working Group has its first meeting this afternoon, and I'll speak to you in a moment, members, after this meeting, because we might want to bring that forward now we've finished a little bit earlier. If you remember at the last meeting, we agreed that I'd email out and then expressions of interest to join. So the membership is Victoria Wilson, Anne Edgeler, Matthew Wallens, Reverend Metcalfe, Tracy Doherty. Those are the 5 members. Then on Monday the 27th of October at 11, you've got a briefing with Phil Pusey, who's the Chief Executive of Skivvies, that's the Staffordshire Council for Voluntary Youth Services, and Lynn Milligan, who's the Safeguarding and Voluntary Safeguarding Partnership Board Officer, and that's taking place in county buildings for those who are able to attend, but I will also be able to organise for some people to meet online because it's not a public meeting. So it can be hybrid, but Phil Pusey is coming in, so if some people are able to attend in person, that would be useful, I think. Tuesday the 4th of November at 3:30, you've got the rearranged briefing on the family hubs. And this is a joint briefing, and this is all online, so this is all via Teams, and that's the joint one with Health and Care colleagues, Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny colleagues, and that was the rearranged, and that I think you might find very helpful as well. We've mentioned this morning quite a bit about early years and early intervention, so that I think will give you some more insight into that. And then on the 7th of November is the visit to the integrated front door for children and MASH for adults, which is at Lindham House. And again, a bit nearer the time, I'll contact you all. But essentially, for anyone who's travelling, it's just outside Stone, Lindham House is. So if you're travelling from Newcastle, it makes no sense to drive past to go back, does it? But if you're anywhere the other side, we'll meet in Stafford and try and share lifts and move there together, because parking is very limited. And also access to the building is also very limited because of the nature of what they do. So we need to meet in the car park really and access it together if at all possible. And that's it. There's plenty to do this next 4 weeks.
Can I just ask about the meeting that was mentioned at the beginning of this meeting? You know, I'll leave that.
So in connection, Mrs. Edger, with the deaths
Yes.
this week, so there will absolutely be a whole series of investigations and reviews as part of that. The police investigation is obviously ongoing. I will speak to colleagues in social care, but I am absolutely sure that their response will be there is nothing that they can share at this moment, because obviously it's very early on. So apart from expressing, as you have done today, your sadness and shock at what happened, I think it needs to be on the work programme as something that you need to have more information on. Absolutely, there, as the Safeguarding Committee, you will want to understand if there was anything that needed to be done more from this, from a local authority point of view. But at the moment, it's too early, I think, for any information to be shared, partly because until they've done the appropriate investigations, they won't know necessarily, will they, where those gaps, if there were gaps, are, or maybe. So yes, so I will include that on the work programme, but as an open item, because we can't allocate that until we've allowed for the appropriate investigations to take place.
Would you also agree that maybe at the moment, if we are approached by any press, that we do not actually give any comments?
I do. I think that we don't know, do we? No, until the appropriate investigation has been done, nobody will know. Your sympathies are with the family and friends. It's a terrible thing to have happened, but none of us know exactly what happened, and none of us understand who was involved and the intricacies of the work that took place. And until that sort of information has been found, there is nothing really for anybody to be able to say, is there, that would be helpful. So I think, yes, absolutely, it's something that you absolutely are right to raise, you're absolutely right to include on the work programme, but at the moment we're just not able to get that sort of information to be able to do anything sensible with it. Okay.
Okay, I think we're concluded. Thank you.